Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is International Tiger Day Coexisting with Large Carnivores, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Aditya Panda. Thank you so much for being here today, Aditya. Over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. And hello, everyone. It's so lovely to be back on Daily Dose of Nature after a while. And today is International Tiger Day, or Global Tiger Day, as it is also called. And the theme this year is harmonious coexistence between humans and tigers. And I'm excited to be talking to you about that today. But before I start, I'd like to introduce myself to those of you who are watching one of my webinars for the first time and to those of you who haven't traveled with me. My name is Aditya Panda and I've been leading NatHab expeditions since 2016. I lead NatHab's tiger trips in India, which are the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, India Tiger Safari, and the India Tiger Photo Expedition. When I'm not leading NatHab expeditions, I am based in eastern India in a state called Orissa, and I work here in tiger and elephant landscapes for their conservation and revival. So let's get started. Well, today is Global Tiger Day, and I can assure you that it was not a day that was invented by Archie's or Hallmark. It was, in fact, started in 2010 when all the heads of state of the 13 tiger range countries in the world got together at a place called St. Petersburg in Russia to try and do something about working together to save tigers. Um, this year, 2010, happened to be a year of the tiger as per the Chinese calendar. You know, the Chinese culture has 12 animals to which each year is dedicated, and every 12 years the animals get repeated. So they have a year of the horse, year of the tiger, and 2010 happened to be a year of the tiger, so it was quite an apt occasion for Asian countries to get together and figure something out about tigers, because back then tigers were doing pretty bad. I mean, through the 50-year or so conservation journey that this species has seen, the period in the 90s, the 1990s and the early 2000s was quite bad. It was low in the history of tiger conservation, and because there was a lot of alarm and a lot of concern about the state of the tiger back then. There were barely 3,200 tigers in the world in 2010, and that got these countries together at St. Petersburg at something called the Global Tiger Summit. And over there, they took many decisions, made many promises, and to remind themselves and to remind people about the promise that was made there, they decided to mark the 29th of July every year as International Tiger Day. And one of the key promises made there was TX2, or T times 2 as it is called. Now, what was that? T times 2 was, was a commitment by each of these 13 tiger range countries made at St. Petersburg in 2010, which, as I was explaining, was a Chinese year of the tiger, that by the next year of the tiger, which is 2022, 12 years later, they would double their tiger populations. And all of you know about the close partnership that NatHab shares with WWF. WWF was, at the center of this diplomatic achievement, and it worked. It has been working closely with all of these tiger range countries in trying to achieve that goal. Well, now it's 2025, and let's see how we fared. Now, not all of the tiger range countries managed to meet that goal, which is fair, I guess, because conservation is not easy. And the mere fact that these countries committed to put in the effort to try and achieve that goal in itself is something worth admiring. But of the 13 tiger range countries, four countries did fairly well. India, of course, achieved that goal, ahead of time, well before 2022. Nepal and Bhutan also managed to double their tiger populations, and Russia itself did not quite double the tiger population, but there was significant growth in the number of tigers in Russia, which, of course, are the Amur tiger, Siberian tigers. And this map here shows you where all tigers exist as of today. Of course, less than 100 years ago, far more countries were tiger range countries. Tigers expanded, they extended all the way from the Russian Far East to the shores of the Caspian Sea back then. But of course, we all know that the first half of the 20th century saw tremendous wildlife and wilderness decline all over the world, and tigers today are left only in these 13 countries. And among them, um, you know, success in sustaining tiger populations has been quite varying between these countries. India, of course, stands out as a positive example, as the tiger's last great bastion. We have close to 4,000 tigers in this country right now. Our last All India Tiger Estimation exercise, which happens to be the world's largest biodiversity survey in terms of person days and person hours. Um, our last All India Tiger Estimation exercise was completed in 2022, and we had estimated a mean figure of about 3,680 tigers. And next year, which is 2026, we are expecting our next All India Tiger Estimation exercise to culminate and for new figures to come out. So I've made a very educated guesstimate that we have at least 4,000 tigers in India at the moment. I am expecting a higher number next year. We carry out these population estimations every 4 years at an all India level. Um, so India is home to 75% or more of the world's tigers, and across the Indian subcontinent, which is a very large and very diverse area with many different kinds of ecosystems, from desert to rainforest, and uh, the Trans-Himalayan and Himalayan regions, which are practically like the planet's third pole, to the deciduous forests and mangrove swamps. And in the vast majority of these landscapes, not all these landscapes, of course, but in the vast majority of these landscapes and the varied ecosystems that they sustain, the tiger happens to be the largest carnivore, the top predator, and therefore the tiger is the best gauge to measure the success of conservation of these ecosystems, and therefore it has acquired such a central place in India's conservation goals. And yes, it has been conserved against impossible odds in this country. At the moment, as we speak, there are 53 tiger reserves that exist in India, and 10 more that are proposed but are yet to be notified, which I'm sure will be notified in due course of time. But we not only have the highest population of tigers in the world, we also have the highest population of humans in the world. We have 1.4 billion people living in this country. And it is extraordinary how people and tigers have been have both getting by and getting along in this country. It is extremely difficult in places like this where the human population is so high and in many areas very dense, to be protecting large carnivores like tigers. They are not only large animals and carnivores in themselves, they're also large ranging, which means that they require tremendous amounts of land as a species to survive and thrive. And it's not just tigers, but it's also Asian elephants, the Asiatic lion, leopards, snow leopards, now even cheetahs, rhinos, wild buffalo, gores, three species of bears, you know, all large and potentially dangerous animals that are thriving in their largest and most stable populations in India after being exterminated from most of the Asian continent. And of course, going with the theme of International Tiger Day this year, I'll explain to you just how we manage to do that. Harmonious coexistence, that was the theme, as I was mentioning. And here you see a tiger fast asleep under a culvert, and people blissfully unaware of it, walking right over it. This was in Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. This is a very old photo. My apologies to the photographer because I tried really hard but could not find out who had actually taken the picture. But since it's widely been doing the rounds on the internet and all forms of media, I took the liberty of using it in the greater interest of communicating a conservation message. So yeah, this is Ranthambore. There are pilgrims there walking to a temple that is located inside the national park. They're walking on foot, and there you have a tiger fast asleep. Now, this was earlier this year, I think in the month of April or May, uh, on one of my trips to the park. And, this is a young tigress, a sub-adult. You could call her a sub-adult. And she was called Kankati, which means the one with a nick in her ear. And a week after I took this picture, this tigress killed a ranger. A week before I took this picture, a child had been killed by a tiger along that very same path. And people weren't sure exactly which tiger it was, but we later found out that it was her. And of course, she needed to be captured and taken away. Fortunately, she did not have to be shot because that is what would usually be done if a tiger has turned into a conflict animal and starts to habitually kill people and capture efforts fail for some reason. So, yeah, is it really possible for humans to coexist with a 600-pound carnivore? I mean, this tigress here, of course, is a sub-adult. She's barely 200 pounds, but I'm speaking figuratively. An adult male tiger can weigh 600 pounds. And is it really possible for us to coexist with them? Because coexist is a pretty heavy term. Coexist means that I want to exist with you. I respect your rights and you respect my rights, and it's mutual. And we both exist next to each other and get along and get by. Now, to be very honest, we humans find it hard enough to coexist with each other. Can we really coexist with a predator, a carnivore, one that is potentially capable of killing us, killing our friends and family, killing our neighbors, and very likely killing and eating our livestock, our cattle, our sheep, our goats? The answer to that is yes. But what matters really is scale. It really matters what scale we are talking about when we say coexistence. Um, Coexistence, as I was saying again, has to be mutual. So it has to be there on the tigers' part as well. And if you talk about India as a whole, yes, of course we coexist with tigers. Tigers know people exist, people know tigers exist. More or less, they know their boundaries, and both the species tend to respect those boundaries. The tigers tend to respect those boundaries far more than people tend to do, I must say. But yes, at a national scale, we do coexist. We have been coexisting for centuries. At the level of a state or the level of a district is what you in the US would call a county. We do coexist. But can we really coexist at the scale of a neighborhood or of a field or a road or a village or, you know, a pathway that both species use every day, day in and out? I don't think that's possible, and I think it's bound to end in conflict. And I will go into the details and explain to you why that's the case and how sometimes that's inevitable and what we are doing to try and address that. Now, in India, our conservation journey in the modern sense started in 1972. Uh, if you go back way back in history into the medieval and pre-medieval periods, there are concepts of conservation. There are concepts of hunting seasons and fishing seasons, and certain animals that should never be harmed or hunted, and certain forests or certain wildernesses that should not be hunted in. So conservation as an ethos goes back really back in time in Indian culture and history, and that certainly plays a big role in how 1.4 billion people can not only tolerate but actually celebrate 4,000 tigers among them. But it gets way more complicated than that. Coming back to the topic, coming back to this slide, I was talking about how in 1972 we started a modern journey into wildlife conservation, and it all started with a piece of legislation called the Wildlife Protection Act, which was passed in 1972, um, which outlawed all hunting and it called for the establishment of a lot of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. And we did have national parks earlier. We did have game reserves earlier, but they were very small and very few. After 1972, there was a boost in the number of protected areas, if I may use a generalized term for national parks and state parks and tiger reserves and all manner of wildlife reserves. The number of protected areas rose significantly after 1972 and has been rising continuously, consistently. And also, these parks became much larger than they were prior to 1972. And in 1973, we started something called Project Tiger, where we delineated these areas called tiger reserves, which could be a national park or a state park or both, and which essentially aimed at setting aside land for wildlife, setting aside land for tigers. What this meant was that, very similar to the national park model that the United States has pioneered since the period of Roosevelt, uh, very similar to that, it meant that we would set aside large chunks of natural wilderness entirely for wildlife, um, phase out the usage of those landscapes by people for anything other than research and recreation, and that humans would have that humans would not have first right over these areas, and that wildlife would have first right over these areas. And in the case of tiger reserves, tigers, of course, had and still have first right over these areas. These areas would again be subdivided, sort of like a subset within a set, into what we call core areas and buffer areas. The core area of a tiger reserve or a state park or a national park is an area inside which no human habitation is permitted and no unauthorized human entry is permitted. But surrounding the core area and literally buffering it from human dominated landscapes outside are what are called buffer areas. Now, buffer areas are also areas of wilderness, but with very limited human occupation. There might be villages in there, there might be people living there, there might be people farming, raising livestock, um, living a way of life, that goes back way in time, living off the land, collecting forest produce like firewood, like jungle fruit and other produce like resins and honey and things like that. And wildlife also lives there. Hunting is prohibited there, but people and wildlife sort of are expected to share that landscape and kind of coexist. Again, I would much rather prefer a term um, called co-occur or co-occurrence to replace the term coexist and coexistence, because co-occur, I think, is more accurate than coexist for reasons I explained in such detail earlier. But in, uh, in simple terms, you could call these core areas and these protected areas as fortresses of conservation. These protected areas aim to fortress our last great wilderness areas from the impact of humanity and other anthropogenic pressures, and safeguard them for wildlife so that wildlife can thrive and survive within them. Unfortunately, the term fortress conservation has also acquired a rather negative term, a rather negative connotation these days among certain schools of thought within both the wildlife conservation community as well as um, the scientific and research communities that deal with anthropology, with people, with old ways of life and old cultures and civilizations. This school of thought argues that fortress conservation is actually trying to save wildlife at the cost of human rights, at the cost of the most marginalized communities that very fairly and very honestly did the least to damage wildlife and wildlife habitats, but are having to pay the highest price because someone living in Delhi or Bombay or Calcutta or Bangalore or Hyderabad or any of the large cities of India does not have to deal firsthand with with some of the challenges and the limitations and prohibitions that conservation regulations can impose on the way of life that people living right next to these areas face. Of course, people living in cities, in urban areas, people that are well to do, educated, and have a good life, they can afford to care more about wildlife than people that actually have to put up with leopards and tigers picking up children and people or killing livestock, or people whose way of life, sometimes their livelihoods are affected negatively by conservation measures. Uh, Question is, uh, Is that actually the case? Are we conserving tigers at the cost of communities in India? Here, I would like to make a case for idealism versus realism. Yes, it is true that communities living right next to large carnivores and mega herbivores, elephants, tigers, are having to pay the highest price for their conservation because looking at it from a point of view purely of historical justice, um, these people are living a way of life that their ancestors have lived for centuries. They live close to the land. They live with far less resources than we do. They take far less from the land than we have done. And the uh, in an ideal world, if everybody lived like that, we would not have to be having this debate of fortresses being there for conservation. But we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a real world. In a real world, um, India is no longer a swathe of wilderness with pockets of human habitation, spread, uh, in fragmented ways across it. Today, India is a swathe of human habitation with pockets of wilderness surviving here and there, and just trying to make it to the next decade and the next century. And of course, it is um, always a sensitive topic, but the fact is that it is impossible to go back in time and change that. And we must deal with conservation conundrums in the context of the challenges that exist today, in today's day and age, and the challenges that are going to exist in the next 10, 50, 100, 200 years. So here there is a case for ensuring that these last remaining wilderness tracts are kept safe and secure from the impact of humans. And it is an unfortunate fact of life today that in a country like India, um, even an ancestral way of life, even a way of life where people are living off the land in a very, very sustainable manner, is no longer sustainable in the immediate vicinities of our last megafauna habitats. Realities change with time, and that is exactly what is happening here in India today. Another idealistic idea that I think um, this other school of thought is trying to struggle with is that in assuming that this ancestral way of life will continue forever. I think in assuming that, we are discounting the aspirations of people, especially children and youngsters among these communities, their aspirations for probably wanting to live closer to the mainstream of society, because these are villages that are extremely remote. These are villages that are far from major cities, that are far from the urban centers, that are far from the conveniences and facilities such as 24-hour electricity, water supply, healthcare, education, all of that, markets. Um, they're pretty difficult for these communities to access, especially the communities living in villages that actually are inside the protected areas. I'm not talking about the ones that are on the fringes of protected areas. I'm talking about the ones that are actually inside the core areas and the buffer areas of these protected areas. There is a tremendous amount of desire in today's day and age where 5G internet is everywhere, for youngsters in these communities to want to live the urban life, the cool life with motorbikes and cars and offices and fancy houses. And it is not for us to sit and lament at these aspirations um, appearing among youngsters within these communities, because it is, after all, free choice, free will. And I think there has to be the element of free will when we are debating things like this. Does a person or a family or a community want to live the way of life that their ancestors have given them? Or are they looking at an aspirational life where they don't have to worry about elephants trampling their crops, or tigers or leopards picking them up when they go out at night in the darkness into the jungle to answer the call of nature? Or do they want to live that life? Do they want to lead a better life in their understanding? And I think that's very important to answer. There has to be the option to choose to lead one form of life or the other. Of course, there is no question that an ancestral way of life, when led by communities in these areas, does very little damage to nature and wildlife. Not that it doesn't do any damage, because even that way of life can have its anthropogenic impacts. People, for example, have to depend on raising livestock such as cattle, and cattle grazing in tiger habitats poses many threats. Not only is there the threat to the cattle themselves from tigers, but there is also a tremendous amount of threat of disease from transmitting from cattle to wild ungulates such as deer and gore, and also a lot of overgrazing and habitat destruction that happens as a result of unsustainable amounts of livestock being raised in what is supposed to be natural ecosystems. Similarly, people collect firewood, they indulge in a lot of bushmeat poaching, and all of these have a tremendous amount of negative impact on tigers and their habitat. India has come up with what we think of as a win-win solution here. I just spoke about how important choice is in this debate, how people living, well-off lives in urban areas do not really have the right or authority to decide whether or not people should be living right next doors to tigers and other wildlife. I'm just saying tigers here because today's topic is about tigers, but this could apply to many species. This could apply to elephants, this could apply to leopards, this could apply to many species. Um, India has, for quite a while now, had a scheme called the Voluntary Relocation Scheme. This scheme applies to people and communities that are trapped within protected areas, and later it has been enhanced to apply to people living in any remote forested areas. Here, if a family or an individual or a village chooses to move out of that area, to move closer to mainstream society, they are given a life changing amount of compensation. And not only that, there is a whole hand holding process that absolutely helps them in transitioning from their old way of life to a far superior way of life. Um, First of all, as I mentioned, this scheme mandates that relocation can only be voluntary, and that is not mandated only by the scheme. There is also a law that ensures that. It's called the Forest Rights Act, which is a law that seeks to preserve the rights of people that have traditionally been dwelling in forested areas, primarily applying to indigenous communities, but can also, by extension, be applied to anybody who can prove that they've been living for more than 20 years in forested areas. Um, it can the voluntary relocation scheme can only be executed after the family's rights have been settled, rights over the land have been settled as per the Forest Rights Act. A life-changing amount of money is given to them in compensation for moving out, and the money is given per family. But the definition of family here also includes any single adults that are, anyone who's over the age of 18 and is single. They might be unmarried, they might be widowed, they might be divorced. It doesn't matter. They're seen as a family unit. So often what we see is that within the same family, uh, within the same nuclear family, say for example, husband, wife, and two grown-up children, two children who are over the age of 18, they would actually qualify as three families and therefore receive three times the compensation. Besides that, they are compensated for the land, typically in an area of their choice outside the reserve. Often they choose to take land in lieu of their ancestral land or original land in commercially very promising areas, like right next to a highway or right next to a major uh, road, which further enhances their incentive, because if you have a plot of land right next to a highway versus a plot of land deep in a forest which is being ravaged by wildlife, it makes a lot of difference to the amount of earnings you can acquire from that land. They're provided new housing. They are provided access to healthcare, education, and markets, all three of which are extremely difficult to get within the remote areas inside protected areas. And there is a very complex hand-holding procedure that lasts for several years to help these families rehabilitate to their new way of life. And what we are seeing is that there is tremendous interest among families across India's tiger habitats to choose this scheme and to move out and to transform their lives. And it's not just their lives that get transformed, it is also wildlife habitats that get transformed. Because, typically humans occupy valleys close to water and cultivate them. And from a wildlife perspective, these are absolute rich natural habitats that can provide tremendous amounts of grass and forage for ungulate prey like deer and elephants and gore. And as soon as villages are relocated, in most areas we see that these valleys immediately transform into meadows within a year or two, and deer populations skyrocket. And following the deer come tigers and leopards and wild dogs, and their populations can finally begin to rebuild. Now, if you look at India's tiger conservation success, um, have a close look at this map. And here you see India's tiger states. Not all states in India have tigers. Look at India's tiger states, and uh, it's a color-coded map. The more orange you get, you have states that have high number of tigers, and the more white you get, you have states that have low number of tigers. Now, if you watch this map, you will notice that India's tiger conservation success over the last 52 years has not been uniform. The states in the from north to south through the center of the country have done fairly well. But look to the east of central India, and then again to the far east, right at the tip where it says Arunachal Pradesh, a part of the country that we call the Northeast. If you look at eastern central India and the Northeast, the tiger numbers here have actually collapsed. They have not increased. They have not seen the same kind of success that other tiger states in the country have seen. And the key reason behind that is that these are the states that have been absolute laggards when it comes to implementing this voluntary relocation scheme in their tiger reserves. The states that did it early on saw fantastic success. They had tiger habitat consolidated and tiger numbers skyrocketing, and people that inhabited those tiger reserves lived outside the reserve and were more at peace with the state establishment and the park management than the states in east of central India and in the northeast, where voluntary relocation was not done. Now, you know, in the states where voluntary relocation was not done, villages continue to exist inside tiger habitats. Tiger numbers have never managed to increase. They have gone down instead, and habitat quality has gone down in these last 52 years. Prey populations have dwindled because of extensive bushmeat poaching, and also the amount of conflict between people who live in the forests and the park managements is also very high. Now, one state, the one I'm from, which you can see on your screen, called Odisha, has finally, in the recent past, over the past 15 years, started implementing the voluntary relocation scheme, and the results are absolutely phenomenal. And I'll talk to you about that soon. But before I talk about that, let me talk about one case study of a tiger reserve called Kanha. Kanha is a national park in central India that we visit on our Grand India Wildlife Adventure expedition. And it is a park that is really close to my heart. And you've heard me talk about it many times in past webinars. Kanha has the last population of an extremely rare species of deer called the hard-ground Barasinga. The hard-ground Barasinga was once found all over central India, but their population declined, especially after the later half of the 19th century. And their population decline corresponded with the population explosion of people from the late 19th century onwards. Barasinga are habitat specialists. They require very high quality swampy grasslands to survive. And as human population exploded in the period after the late 19th century, that is the particular type of habitat that was destroyed the most, because that was the easiest to cultivate and the easiest to settle in. And Barasinga populations collapsed until about 55 animals were left in Kanha in the 1960s. To save the Barasinga, Kanha National Park actually pioneered the voluntary relocation scheme. And a village called Sonf was the first village to be relocated for the purpose of wildlife conservation in India's conservation history. And that happened in Kanha National Park in the 1970s. And after the village of Sonf, several other villages from inside Kanha were relocated, and Kanha's very well-known savanna grasslands are a result of that. Once humans moved out, nature took over and natural grasslands returned. Today we have about 1,200 Barasinga, up from the 55, and Kanha began to thrive as a tiger habitat. Now, most of these people, most of these villages were settled right outside the national park on the fringes, so that they remained in the same landscape, so that they could still more or less continue their old way of life, so that they were not airdropped somewhere strange and hostile. And today, the vast majority of the descendants of those villagers are the ones that are making an extremely good livelihood out of the tourism industry that has come up in and around Kanha. So there you have wildlife tourism having a direct impact not only on the lives of these people but also on conservation in the park. And if you compare the socioeconomic parameters, say within a 10 or 20-mile radius of Kanha National Park, they are significantly higher than the same parameters elsewhere in that region and elsewhere within those districts in which the around which the park is located. Here, I'll show you an example from a national park in my state, a tiger reserve called Simlipal. Simlipal, as I was earlier mentioning, happens to be in my state of Orissa, which is one of the laggard states east of central India that did not carry out voluntary relocation well in time. And it suffered as a result. The tiger population collapsed. In 2014, there were 4 tigers left in the park, just 4, 1 male and 3 females. And it's just, a stroke of good luck that it was 1 male and 3 females and not 3 males and 1 female, because had that been the case, very likely that tiger population would have gone extinct. Now, how that tiger population again rebounded from 4 is entirely to do with voluntary relocation. This village, I took this picture in 2010 of a village called Jamunagad. And I think 3 or 4 years later, Jamunagad village chose to move out of the national park, and that relocation was carried out. And last year in 2024, which was 10 years after the village was relocated, I happened to be there at this very site. And this is what we were watching that late afternoon at the very site where there used to be a village. Just watch this video. It's a very interesting looking tiger, and I'll tell you about it later. This is what we call a melanistic tiger. Of those 4 tigers that survived in 2014, of which, as I was telling you, just 1 was a male, that male happened to be a mutant. It had a mutation which caused it to be melanistic or pseudomelanistic, as is more accurate. That mutation causes too much melanin to be present in the skin of the animal, causing the stripes to merge into each other, almost looking black. And this is the only population of black tigers in the world. So, I've tried to address a very complex, a very layered subject in a very narrow, very short period of time through this webinar. And I hope I've done justice to it. But just to sum up everything that I just said, conservation, especially large carnivore and megafauna conservation, is perennially a work in progress. It is an endless pursuit of a goal, and there are no destinations here. There will always be a goal, but it will always be a work in progress, a work in compromise, in many wins and many losses, to just try and keep things going. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, I am expecting, I know India will have far more tigers than it has done in the past 50 years. But I also know that things such as human-tiger conflict are still going to be there. Mortality among both tigers and mortality among people from tigers is still going to be there. But what is important and what is key is to understand that the community as a whole, the citizenry as a whole, and the nation as a whole needs to want to protect tigers for posterity. And that has been the case so far in India, and that has been the primary reason why 4,000 tigers are surviving, not just surviving, but thriving among 1.5 billion people, 1.4 billion people. And that despite the dangers and the losses that are associated with having large carnivores as neighbors, people still see greater common good and are largely supportive of large carnivore conservation, tiger conservation in particular, especially in areas where wildlife tourism is used as a tool for not just conservation, but also as a tool to generate livelihood and revenues at scale in large carnivore and mega herbivore habitats. So with that, I come to to the end of today's webinar. But before I move on to the question and answer session, I would like to leave you all with this video from last month, where the NatHab India field team landed up at our next destination, a new destination that will become available to all of you from next year, Tadoba Tiger Reserve in central India. This video was taken by my friend and esteemed colleague Harsha J, who is also a very well-known NatHab expedition leader. And just watch what happens. Sorry. Now, I don't know how that video played for you, but for me, it was like a slideshow of pictures. It was quite patchy. Apologies for that. Brooke, questions?
Oh, thank you, Aditya. I knew you were the perfect person to tap when I saw it was International Tiger Day. And from everybody's comments so far, we all agree that was amazing, Aditya. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful knowledge with us. And also, just before we get to the Q&A, could you also share what you do with Secosia? Like, you're more than just a guide. You actually are heavily involved in conservation itself. So please share with everybody what you do.
Well, yes, I am the honorary wildlife warden of Satkosia, which is a tiger reserve in, in my state, which I've been working hard to conserve practically all my adult life. An honorary wildlife warden is a post that that's there in India and I think in a few other countries like Kenya, where a person with high credibility who has been working for conservation for a long time is vested with official powers in a particular area where they practically are like a ranger or a warden, except that they are off the rolls. So it's entirely voluntary, but you get fully legally empowered to implement the law and to advise the government on conservation matters. And yeah, I also now serve on my state's state board for wildlife, which is the highest decision-making body in any state in wildlife matters.
Yes. And you like kind of skipped over your bio. It's like actually I know how much you do for wildlife and tigers in India, so I wanted to make sure everybody could hear how involved you are outside of our interview that we did for Rewildology and all of your presentations you've done for here. So, all right, everyone, we have about 2 or 3 minutes. I know we don't have that much time left, but we will get through a few questions. We have a lot of really good ones that have
Mm.
come in that I would like to ask you, Aditya. So,
Sure.
first, this is a good question. So, what is the entity that actually compensates people for this voluntary relocation program? Like, where does that money come from and how is it distributed?
So, wildlife conservation comes under a department called the Department of Environment, Forests, and Climate Change. There is a federal or central department, and then every state has its own department. And the money comes partly from what we call the National Tiger Conservation Authority, which is a federal body, and it comes partly from the state government concerned. So, there is plenty of fund with both these bodies to try and cover the costs of such large scale relocations.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. Next here, has there been many efforts to move and or translocate or rewild capture tigers and move them to areas that need tiger populations? Has that worked in the past?
Yes, it has, and we've done that in Simlipal recently, but we don't translocate conflict tigers. Tigers that kill people as a matter of habit, tigers that have lost their fear of humans, tigers that start seeing people as prey, cannot be safely translocated anywhere. When it comes to tigers like that, it's absolutely in no one's interest, least of all the tiger's own, to translocate it and set it free.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much for that explanation.
But
Um,
we do translocate tigers increasingly routinely now for things such as supplementing gene pools in places like Simlipal, where we have that mutant gene being inbred into that population, or to rewild areas that have lost their tiger population. So for things like that, we routinely translocate tigers in India.
Perfect. Yeah, that was great. That answered some other questions that came in too. So that was fantastic. Yeah, if we're talking about this particular area of tigers that, had only one male, that is very much a limited gene pool. So it's
Yeah,
great that we're able to inject some genetic diversity there.
yeah.
This is a really good question too. So how are other species benefiting from these protective mechanisms of these ecoreas in these parks? Like are leopards benefiting? Are other endangered species also? Um, yeah, are their
Absolutely.
populations boosting?
Absolutely. I think several species in India, say leopards, wild dogs, gaur, elephant, sloth bear, can name many, and many hundreds of smaller, lesser known species have benefited directly from tiger conservation efforts. You see, Brooke, when you target the top carnivore in any ecosystem, the top predator in any ecosystem as your conservation goal, you automatically have to ensure the most holistic protection and management for that ecosystem. So when you protect tigers, even the frogs and butterflies benefit.
Absolutely. Yes, umbrella species is a thing. And now that corridors are becoming such a big, landscape scale conservation and corridors that are connecting all of these landscapes. So once you protect all of that, then we will have our wildlife for generations to come. We just got to keep going down that path. Well, awesome, Aditya. We have reached the top of the hour somehow that flew by. So I will turn it to you for any last closing comments.
Well, thank you, Brooke. I hope our audience enjoyed and found this webinar educative. It's, as I was mentioning, a very hard topic and a very complex topic that's very difficult to explain in a short period of time. But if they have any further questions, if you can email me the questions that I haven't been able to answer, I'd be happy to answer them and try and communicate this very difficult topic as much as possible to as many people as possible. So, yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to get you back on soon, Aditya. And also, you're very active on Instagram. So I also recommend people reach out to you there and see all of your beautiful big cats and other wildlife images there, since you are one of our top photo guides. So everyone definitely check that out. But again, thank you, Aditya. You shared your knowledge wonderfully with us. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.